Welcome to True Echo, where real voices ripple into lasting change. Today's story is not just about injustice, but how quiet dignity can dismantle prejudice and spark a movement. Stay with us till the end, it's one you'll never forget. Naomi Carter stepped into Crown Lumiere just after sunset. The golden glow of the chandeliers bathed the room in warmth, but it didn't touch her. Dressed in a crisp white blouse and plain black slacks, her natural curls bouncing softly against her shoulders, Naomi looked nothing like the typical patron that frequented Beverly Hills' most exclusive dining space. And she didn't care. She wasn't here for appearances. She wanted a quiet meal, a moment of solitude after a long day filled with meetings, decisions, and the constant pressure of running a business in a world that often questioned her presence. She had no makeup, no designer purse on her arm. Just a small canvas bag tucked over one shoulder, comfortable flats on her feet, and the kind of calm confidence that only comes from years of pushing past invisible walls. As she approached the host's stand, a hush seemed to ripple through the restaurant. Conversations slowed. Heads turned. Naomi could feel the weight of glances that had nothing to do with admiration. Behind the host's stand stood Ashley Miller, the head server, polished, pristine, and icy. Her blonde bun was pulled so tight it might have cracked porcelain, and her expression carried the rehearsed politeness of someone who smiled only when necessary. Her eyes scanned Naomi, from her shoes to her hair, and in that half-second glance, she made her judgment. Naomi offered a gentle, unbothered smile. "I'd like a table for one, please." Ashley blinked slowly, let the silence stretch past awkward into hostile. Then, with a voice just loud enough to carry to the nearby tables, she asked, "Are you sure you can afford to eat here?" The words sliced through the air. A soft gasp escaped someone's lips. A few diners chuckled nervously, as if unsure whether it was a joke or entertainment. Naomi's eyes didn't flinch. She simply replied, "Yes. I'm quite sure." But Ashley wasn't done. "This is Crown Lumiere," she said, emphasizing the name like it was a royal court, not a restaurant. Not some fast food joint down the street. Naomi said nothing. She didn't have to. Her stillness was louder than any outburst could have been. Ashley, clearly annoyed that Naomi hadn't taken the bait, tapped slowly at the computer, her fingers making exaggerated motions. "Name? Naomi Carter." Ashley typed it in, eyes darting to the screen, then back to Naomi. "I don't see a reservation. Our guests usually book well in advance. Especially, guests like you." There it was. Not even a subtle insult anymore. A few young patrons at a corner table began whispering, one of them discreetly recording the exchange on their phone. Naomi caught the movement out of the corner of her eye but didn't acknowledge it. She just waited. Ashley sighed, yanked a menu from the rack, and without a word, turned sharply on her heel. Naomi followed her past glowing chandeliers and designer gowns, but instead of leading her toward the luxurious main hall, Ashley guided her down a side corridor. There, next to the kitchen, was a dimly lit table shoved against a wall, humming with the sounds of clanging pans and staff chatter. The heat was stifling. No music, no ambience. Just the stench of grease and the cold intent of discrimination. "This table suits you better," Ashley said, her voice smooth as glass but sharp as a dagger. "If you need anything, let me know. But please, don't disturb the other guests." Naomi sat down. Back straight. Chin high. She opened the menu slowly, deliberately, as though she had all the time in the world. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ashley stared at her for a long moment, arms crossed, waiting for a flicker of shame, of anger, of defeat. But Naomi gave her none. That smile was still there. Subtle, unbothered, and devastating. Ashley huffed and didn't move. Not right away. She stood by, watching, waiting for Naomi to stumble over a French dish or ask about prices. But Naomi simply studied the menu like it was a contract she intended to sign. After a few moments, she looked up. Which dish is the signature here? Ashley hesitated. The filet de Rossini, she said eventually. It's $350. Very elaborate. Maybe not something from your neighborhood. Naomi met her gaze evenly. I'll have the filet de Rossini. And a wine to pair with it, please. Ashley blinked. Her professional mask cracked for a half second. Then she recovered. Of course. But I should let you know, we have a 20% mandatory gratuity policy. Naomi didn't blink. That's fine. Bring the dish. Ashley turned and walked away. Her heels clacked on the marble floor like war drums. Around Naomi, the room buzzed with an uncomfortable energy. Some guests glanced over awkwardly. Others, mostly silent, sipped their wine and tried not to engage. But a small handful watched intently. Phones raised discreetly. Words whispered with growing disbelief. Naomi sat in the heat near the kitchen with elegance, dignity, and an unshakable calm. She smoothed the menu, adjusted her blouse, and waited. The waitress hadn't just underestimated her finances. She had underestimated everything. And Naomi Carter hadn't even started revealing the truth yet. 15 minutes passed. 15 long, simmering minutes in which Naomi Carter remained seated, untouched appetizer forgotten on a silver tray in the kitchen, while Ashley swept through the main hall with grace and charm, laughing softly at patrons' jokes and offering attentive service. Her voice was syrupy sweet at other tables, but she hadn't even returned to Naomi's. It wasn't an oversight. It was a power play. From across the room, a young couple, both dressed in chic dinner attire, watched with growing discomfort. The woman leaned toward her partner, whispering, "She hasn't been served yet." Her boyfriend, frowning, responded, "It's deliberate. Look at the way that server's been acting all night." At Naomi's table, the heat from the kitchen wafted around her, but she didn't fan herself. She didn't sigh. Instead, she calmly watched the door, poised like she was expecting something, or someone. And in a way, she was. Ashley finally returned, setting down the appetizer with an unnecessary thud that splattered a bit of the dressing onto the plate's rim. "Here you go," she said with a tight smile. "Hope you know how to eat it. Most of our regulars have their own way." Naomi met her condescending gaze. "Thank you," she replied, her tone perfectly polite. "I'll try to enjoy it like one of the regulars." The moment passed like a razor through velvet. Ashley's expression tightened, then she turned and strode away, shoulders stiff. What Ashley failed to notice, or perhaps chose to ignore, was the rising tide of attention her actions were drawing. More diners were whispering now, and a few phones were aimed in Naomi's direction, pretending to record desserts or wine bottles but instead capturing every dismissive movement of Ashley's. At a corner table, an elderly man set down his wine and adjusted his suit jacket. His silver hair shimmered in the light, his posture upright and deliberate. His name was Richard Bennett, a longtime patron and a quiet voice of dignity. He watched the exchange, then quietly stood and made his way toward Naomi's table. Naomi looked up in surprise as he approached. With a slight bow, he said softly, "Child, don't let small-minded prejudices hurt you. Your patience is your greatest strength. People like you are needed here, not unwanted." She smiled, touched by the unexpected kindness. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes softened. In that brief moment, the room didn't feel quite so cold. Ashley saw him at Naomi's table and stormed over, her mask of professionalism slipping once again. "Sir, could you return to your table?" she said, her voice sharp but barely controlled. "I can handle things here." It was a challenge. Mr. Bennett looked at her with quiet disappointment but didn't argue. He turned to Naomi one last time. "If you need me, I will always stand with you," he said gently, then walked away. Ashley watched him retreat, then returned her full attention to Naomi, her voice dropping to a low hiss. "Are you sure you still want to eat here?" Not everyone likes their evening ruined by an inappropriate presence. The insult was no longer veiled. It was open, brazen, and laced with racial malice. Gasps rippled across the restaurant. A woman near the window whispered, "Did she just say that?" Out loud. A phone camera turned directly toward Ashley. Naomi stayed silent. She knew the words weren't meant to invite conversation. They were meant to provoke. To bait her into an outburst that would make her the angry black woman Ashley wanted her to become. But Naomi wouldn't give her that power. Instead, she lifted her glass, took a sip of water, and said, "I'm fine. Please bring my entree." That simple response, composed and clear, was more devastating than anything else she could have said. And it was all the room needed to see exactly who was composed, and who was not. A young woman near the window, the same one who had been recording discreetly earlier, now whispered to her friend, "Start live streaming. The world needs to see this." In seconds, the quiet murmurs turned into outraged voices. A man stood up from a center table, pointing at Ashley. "I demand to see the manager. This is unacceptable. We are in 2025, not 1965. Ashley blanched. She took a small step back. The phones were out now, at least 7 visible, capturing her every movement. The video was already streaming, comments pouring in from viewers who could barely believe what they were watching. "She's being harassed. This woman's grace is unreal. Expose this server. Tag the restaurant." And in the middle of it all, Naomi sat with her back straight, a calm smile on her lips, and her dignity intact. She knew what was coming next. Because this wasn't just a dinner. This was a reckoning. The restaurant's hushed elegance had completely unraveled. Crown Lumiere, once a haven for whispered conversations and fine wine, now buzzed with indignation, tension, and barely contained disbelief. Diners were no longer just murmuring, they were filming, whispering loud enough to be heard, demanding answers. Ashley stood frozen in the middle of the chaos she had created, and for the first time that evening, her expression betrayed a sliver of fear. The tension snapped like a string when the back office door opened, and David Walker, Crown Lumiere's general manager, emerged. He was a tall man in his early 50s, salt and pepper hair combed with precision, every inch of him exuding the gravitas of a man used to command. But as he stepped into the room and saw every face turned toward one corner of the restaurant, Naomi's corner, his confident stride slowed slightly. He followed their stares, his eyes landing on the woman sitting calmly near the kitchen, surrounded by a silent storm. David's expression shifted. Recognition. Surprise. Then respect. He approached Naomi directly, bypassing Ashley entirely. With a slight bow and a deep breath, he spoke, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice warm and earnest. "My sincere apologies. We had no idea you were joining us this evening. How may I assist you? We deeply regret that your experience has not met the standard Crown Lumiere holds itself to." The entire room froze. Ashley's face drained of color. Naomi raised her eyes and met David's. "Thank you, Mr. Walker. I appreciate that. I only wanted a quiet dinner. But I believe there's more to address than just my personal experience tonight." Gasps and murmurs flooded the room like a rising tide. Diners looked from Naomi to David to Ashley, as the implications began to dawn. Miss Carter wasn't just any guest. She wasn't even a VIP. She was the owner. Ashley's lips parted, but no sound came. Her eyes darted from face to face, as if searching for some escape hatch. There was none. The confidence, the superiority she had worn like armor, shattered into fragile disbelief. David turned to Ashley now, his voice stern. "Ashley, report to my office immediately after your shift. Every complaint from tonight will be addressed, and I will be reviewing the footage. For now, step away from Miss Carter's table. I will be serving her personally." The silence that followed wasn't just shock, it was reverence. The same guests who had scoffed, whispered, and judged now looked at Naomi with a strange mix of guilt and admiration. Some avoided her gaze. Others nodded respectfully. Ashley stood frozen, unable to move. "Now, please," David repeated, his tone final. Ashley backed away slowly, her feet dragging like anchors, then vanished down the corridor, the weight of hundreds of stairs crushing what little defiance remained. David bowed again to Naomi. "Would you allow me to pour your wine personally?" Naomi nodded, serene but resolute. "Yes. And I'd also like to speak with your staff tonight." "All of them?" David blinked. "Of course." In the background, the live stream continued to surge. Comments flooded in. "She owns the place. Justice served in real time. This is what dignity looks like." The restaurant, once shaken, now began to shift again, this time toward reflection. The same diners who had initially laughed or turned away were now whispering apologies, raising glasses toward Naomi in silent respect. When David returned with the wine, Naomi thanked him with grace. Then she stood up and, with quiet authority, asked for the dining room's attention. "I'm not here to humiliate anyone," she said calmly. "I didn't come to prove a point. But I do think what happened tonight reflects something bigger than just one bad experience." The entire room listened. "I want to speak to the staff. Not to punish, but to teach. To make sure this never happens to anyone again." David nodded and turned to the nearby waitstaff. "Let's gather in the staff room. Now." Within minutes, the back of the restaurant was filled with employees, servers, cooks, hostesses, even the janitor. They stood shoulder to shoulder, nervous and uncertain. And at the front stood Naomi Carter. No title. No announcement. Just a black woman who had endured humiliation with grace, and now stood to make something better. The staff room, normally a place of brief laughter and break-time banter, was now cloaked in an unusual stillness. Servers stood pressed against the walls, aprons slightly wrinkled, hands clasped or fidgeting nervously. Line cooks peeked in from the swinging kitchen doors, their arms crossed with unease. Even the dishwasher, who barely spoke English, stood quietly at the back, watching Naomi Carter with wide, curious eyes. Naomi didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I didn't ask for this attention," she began, her voice calm but steady. "I came here tonight for a meal. But what I received instead, was a mirror. A mirror reflecting the kinds of biases too many people still carry, sometimes quietly, sometimes boldly." Ashley stood near the corner of the room, her face red, mascara faintly streaked from the tears she tried to hide earlier. She didn't make eye contact. Her usual composure had withered into something more human, ashamed, exposed, and, perhaps, beginning to understand. "I have been told you don't belong, in more ways than I can count," Naomi continued, her gaze sweeping the room. Through words, through silence, through smirks and side eyes. And tonight, it happened again. Not for the first time, and sadly, not the last. But tonight, I chose not to leave quietly. A ripple of movement ran through the staff. A few looked away, others blinked fast, holding back emotion. Even David Walker stood with his head slightly bowed, the weight of Naomi's words sinking in. "But I didn't come here to fire anyone," she said firmly, eyes landing softly, but purposefully, on Ashley. "I came to illuminate something." Ashley flinched, her body tensing under Naomi's gaze. But Naomi's tone carried no venom, only truth. "I believe people can change. I believe we all carry bias, yes, even me. But growth only comes when we face it, admit it, and take steps to undo the damage it causes." For the first time, Ashley lifted her head. Her eyes were glassy, brimming with remorse. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, overwhelmed by the raw grace before her. Naomi took a step forward. "Ashley, I forgive you. Not because I want to pretend this didn't happen. But because I believe you can be better than this moment. That we all can. The silence deepened. And then, unexpectedly, Ashley broke. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I thought. I don't know what I thought. But I was cruel. I don't deserve this job." Naomi shook her head gently. Deserving a job isn't just about what you've done. It's about what you do next. Tears slipped down Ashley's cheeks now. A few other staff members glanced at her, some with surprise, others with quiet support. It was clear she was no longer a villain. Just someone who'd been caught holding a mirror too long without realizing she was part of the reflection. Naomi turned back to the room. Working in a place like Crown Lumiere isn't just about serving food. It's about creating an experience, one that doesn't leave people walking away with invisible wounds. She paused, letting the message sink in. You're the first face people see when they walk in. You decide whether this place feels like home, or a battlefield. One of the younger servers, a girl with dark bangs and nervous eyes, spoke up. "Miss Carter, how do we change that? What do we do differently?" Naomi smiled. "You start by seeing people. Not clothes. Not color. Not your assumptions. Just, people. Learn to recognize the moment when you have a choice between kindness and power, and choose kindness." A beat passed. Then David Walker stepped forward. "In all my years managing this restaurant," he said solemnly, "I've never witnessed a moment like this. Miss Carter, I want to thank you, not just as an owner, but as a teacher." Naomi nodded. "This is a beginning. Not an ending." As the meeting drew to a close, staff slowly approached Naomi, some offering quiet apologies, others thanking her. Even those who hadn't been involved directly now saw the hidden rules they'd followed blindly. The room felt different now. Not perfect. But cracked open. A space where change could begin. Naomi stepped outside the staff room and into the cool Beverly Hills night. The chandelier light from Crown Lumiere glinted behind her, casting a soft reflection along the sidewalk. She paused, looking back just once. Inside that building now stood dozens of people who had been transformed, not by outrage, but by grace. And the ripple had only just begun. The night air was cool against Naomi Carter's skin as she walked slowly down the stone steps of Crown Lumiere. The sound of traffic hummed faintly in the background, but her mind was quiet. Still. Focused. She hadn't come here tonight to prove anything. And yet, what had unfolded inside those opulent walls had become something far greater than a confrontation. It had become a shift. As she reached the sidewalk, Naomi's phone buzzed in her bag. Dozens of notifications flooded her screen. Mentions. Messages. Video tags. A live stream from inside the restaurant had already gone viral. The clip of Ashley's remark, "Are you sure you can afford to eat here?" was being dissected in real time by the internet. But the footage that followed, Naomi's calm responses, David Walker's apology, the stunned silence as she was revealed to be the owner, those moments were resonating even more deeply. She watched briefly as someone on Twitter commented. She didn't have to raise her voice. Her dignity was louder than the whole room. A woman named Denise had written, "I've worked in hospitality 15 years and I've never seen someone handle a situation like that with such power. That was leadership." Another simply said, "Naomi Carter. Remember the name." But Naomi wasn't smiling at the attention. She didn't care about virality. What mattered to her was the conversation now beginning far beyond the walls of Crown Lumiere. People were talking. Thinking. Reflecting. That was her mission all along. Meanwhile, inside the restaurant, David Walker was personally ensuring that every remaining guest received exceptional service. He moved from table to table, his demeanor humble and professional, offering apologies where needed and quietly thanking the patrons who had spoken up. Though he had managed upscale establishments for decades, he couldn't remember a night that had cut so deeply, both in exposure and in redemption. In the locker room, Ashley remained seated, no longer the commanding head server she had once played so confidently. Her uniform was still pristine, but her face had changed, flushed, bare, real. She stared into the floor-length mirror across the room, as if seeing herself clearly for the first time. No layers. No mask. Just a woman who had carried quiet prejudice for years and now stood at the center of her reckoning. A fellow server, Jonah, approached hesitantly. He was younger, kind-hearted, someone who had admired Ashley's control but never her condescension. "You okay?" he asked softly. Ashley didn't look up. "I don't know," she admitted. I thought I was doing my job. Maintaining standards. Keeping things elevated. But now. I realize I was using that as an excuse." Jonah nodded. "People don't need to be humiliated to understand luxury." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "Naomi, Miss Carter," she didn't flinch once. "I don't think I've ever felt more ashamed of myself in my life." Jonah placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "But you can still do something with that shame. You can change." Ashley closed her eyes. "I want to." Back outside, Naomi hadn't yet left. She stood quietly across the street, watching the restaurant as more guests exited, their faces thoughtful, conversations hushed and reflective. Some looked around, perhaps hoping to see her again. A few even typed messages into their phones, likely reaching out to her team or social media accounts to thank her, to apologize, or simply to acknowledge the moment they had witnessed. She didn't need the applause. She didn't even need the closure. But something stirred in her heart when she saw a young black girl, maybe 21, step out of the restaurant's glass door. She wore a server's uniform and held a to-go box in one hand, her apron still tied around her waist. Their eyes met across the street. The girl hesitated, then offered a hesitant wave, her face filled with something between admiration and awe. Naomi smiled gently and returned the wave. And in that small exchange, something powerful passed between them, an understanding that the world hadn't fully changed, but something had begun to crack open. That there was space now, however small, for courage to breathe. Naomi turned and began walking down the boulevard, her steps unhurried, her spirit grounded. She passed designer boutiques, valet stands, and luxury cars, but none of them held her attention. What mattered was ahead. Not just for her, but for every person who had ever walked into a room and been told they didn't belong. She belonged. She always had. And tonight, so did the truth. The next morning, Crown Lumiere's name was trending across every major platform. Hashtag Naomi Carter. Hashtag Crown Lumiere Incident. Hashtag Dignity in the Face of Racism. The viral video clips had amassed millions of views overnight. News outlets ran segments dissecting what happened, praising Naomi's calm leadership and calling attention to the kind of microaggressions that often go unpunished. Some voices were angry. Some ashamed. Others inspired. But few were silent. Inside Naomi's sleek downtown office, her assistant Carla burst in without knocking. "It's everywhere," she said, breathless. "CNN, The Root, Good Morning America. You've got interview requests piling up. Everyone wants to know who you are, how you stayed so calm. It's a media wildfire." Naomi, seated at her desk with her usual calm demeanor, simply sipped her tea. "I didn't do it for attention," she replied. "I did it because people like Ashley are working everywhere. Quietly reinforcing who belongs and who doesn't. And that needs to change." Carla sat down, eyes wide with admiration. "But Naomi, you've just become the face of something huge. You could build an entire movement off this." Naomi shook her head. "Movements are built by communities, not individuals. I'll speak, sure. I'll show up. But I don't want to become some symbol. I want to be a reminder. Carla tilted her head. A reminder of what? That grace is not weakness. That dignity is a weapon. And that change doesn't always come from shouting. Sometimes, it comes from refusing to bow. Later that afternoon, Naomi returned to Crown Lumiere, not through the front entrance, but through the staff entrance, wearing a simple cardigan and jeans. The restaurant was closed for the day. David Walker had personally requested an emergency all-staff meeting, not for damage control, but transformation. When Naomi entered the kitchen, silence fell. Every staff member was there. Chefs, servers, hosts, bussers, even the security team. Ashley stood quietly in the back, eyes lowered but present. Her uniform was still pressed, but her posture had changed. She no longer carried herself like a gatekeeper. She looked like a student, ready to learn. David nodded to Naomi and stepped aside. She addressed the room. "I've been in your shoes," she began. "Years ago, I started as a waitress. I know the pressure to perform, to impress, to keep the standard. But I also know what it feels like to be treated as if you are a disruption to someone's evening, simply for existing." She paced slowly, hands at her sides. "Last night wasn't about me. It was about what so many people go through every day, people who are denied entry, ignored, laughed at, because they don't look the part. I didn't come here today for revenge. I came to build something better." The room was hushed, but attentive. "I want to implement mandatory inclusivity training. I want every member of staff to be trained not just on service, but on empathy. On how to serve every guest with dignity, no matter what they wear, how they speak, or what they look like." There were a few nods. "And more than that," Naomi continued, "I want each of you to think about the moments where you stood by and did nothing. I saw it. Some of you knew what was happening and chose silence." Her eyes swept the room, pausing briefly on a few faces. "But silence helps no one. Silence protects the wrong people." Ashley stepped forward, voice shaking. "Miss Carter. I've been replaying everything in my head. I was wrong. Deeply wrong. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to change. I need to change." Naomi didn't look away. "You already started. By staying. By listening. That's the first step." David cleared his throat, speaking for the first time. "Going forward, Crown Lumiere will lead, not just in cuisine or decor, but in character. I'm working with Miss Carter to redesign our values and training. Our reputation will not be built on silence, but action." Applause followed, not loud or performative, but real. Earned. Naomi stepped back, letting the moment settle into the skin of every person present. That night, the staff of Crown Lumiere stayed behind long after the meeting ended. Some shared stories of moments they'd witnessed or endured. Others asked Naomi questions, eager to learn, to do better. And Ashley? She remained behind until the very end. She approached Naomi as the restaurant emptied out. "I hope one day I can prove I've changed," she said softly. Naomi nodded. "Then start tomorrow. And the next day. And the one after that." They shook hands. A new beginning. Weeks passed, and Crown Lumiere began to feel like a different place. Gone was the invisible chill that once wrapped itself around the entrance like a velvet rope. In its place was warmth, genuine, intentional hospitality that reached everyone who walked through the door. The staff moved with a new rhythm, their service still flawless, but now layered with awareness. They weren't just performing anymore. They were connecting. Guests noticed the change. The smiles felt real. The greetings weren't just polite, they were sincere. Naomi Carter didn't need to be physically present to be felt. Her voice, her story, her standard of dignity had been etched into the foundation. Inside the restaurant, the once most exclusive tables, those near the chandelier or windows, were no longer reserved only for those who looked the part. Now, elegance was measured not by wealth or wardrobe, but by grace, character, and presence. One rainy Thursday night, an older black couple entered Crown Lumiere for the first time. The man wore a worn blazer, the woman a bright blue Sunday dress that clashed slightly with her raincoat. They looked unsure as they stepped in, the kind of couple who had spent decades eating in places where they were treated like afterthoughts. But not here. A young hostess, the same one who had watched the viral incident unfold from a corner weeks ago, smiled widely. "Welcome to Crown Lumiere," she said brightly. "We're honored to have you." The couple exchanged a look of surprise before the woman whispered, "We saw what happened here on the news. We just wanted to see for ourselves." "You're in the right place," the hostess said. "Would you like a table by the windows?" As they were seated and served with care, Naomi sat in a quiet booth not far away, unrecognized. She was there not to monitor, but to witness. And what she saw made her proud, not of herself, but of what had grown from one difficult night. Across the country, more restaurants began adopting Crown Lumiere's inclusivity standards. Articles were written about the Naomi Carter effect, how one woman's calm defiance in the face of casual racism had sparked a much-needed re-evaluation in the hospitality industry. Training companies named programs after her. Diversity panels invited her to speak. Even schools reached out, asking for her to address young professionals entering service industries. But Naomi never made herself the center. Every time she was offered the spotlight, she turned it outward. "This isn't about me," she said in one now viral interview. "This is about the next Naomi who walks into a restaurant, a boardroom, a classroom, and is seen as less before she even speaks. I want her to be treated with the respect she never has to earn, because she already owns it by simply being human." At Crown Lumiere, Ashley was still on staff, but changed. She no longer micromanaged or led with fear. She listened more than she spoke. She asked questions. When she made a mistake, she named it and corrected it. She even led the first staff-wide inclusivity reflection session, a moment no one had seen coming. Afterward, she found Naomi wiping down a wine glass behind the scenes during a surprise inspection. "I never thanked you," Ashley said softly. Naomi looked up. "You didn't need to." Ashley smiled. "I did. Because that night, you didn't just change the restaurant. You changed me." Naomi studied her for a moment, then gave a quiet nod. "Then carry that change forward. Every day. Not just here. Everywhere." Later that evening, Naomi stepped out into the Beverly Hills night, the soft glow of the restaurant behind her. Cars passed, lights blinked, life moved on. But in that moment, she paused on the sidewalk where it all began. So much had changed. And yet, her mission remained simple. Dignity. Equality. And the courage to never lower your head in the face of quiet hate. As she walked away, the Crown Lumiere sign sparkled above, not just a symbol of luxury, but now, a testament to transformation. A place where one woman turned insult into impact, prejudice into progress, and silence into echo. A true echo. In a world that often judges before listening, Naomi Carter showed us the power of staying composed, the strength in quiet resistance, and the importance of standing firm in your truth. Her story reminds us, real class isn't in chandeliers or wine lists, it's in how you treat others when no one's watching. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember that dignity is the loudest voice in the room. Leave your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done if you were Naomi? Or Ashley? Or David? Subscribe to True Echo for more real, raw, and powerful stories of courage, compassion, and change. Until next time, choose respect. Choose empathy. Choose to be the echo the world needs.